The woman's voice cut through the desert wind like a blade through bone. "Take me with you," she begged, her words carrying across the dusty yard of the abandoned way station. But Caleb Hartwell didn't turn around. He couldn't. Not when he recognized that voice. A voice that should have been silenced by 6 feet of Colorado earth 3 years ago. His horse shifted beneath him, sensing the tension that had seized every muscle in his body. The leather reins creaked in his white-knuckled grip as he finally forced himself to look back. There she stood in the doorway of the crumbling adobe building, exactly as he remembered her, raven black hair, eyes like storm clouds, and that same desperate expression that had haunted his dreams for 1,000 nights. Emma, the name fell from his lips like a prayer or a curse. He couldn't tell which. She stepped into the dying light of dusk, and that's when he saw them, the iron shackles around her wrists connected by a chain that disappeared into the shadows behind her. His stomach dropped like a stone into a well. The metal was old, rusted in places, but the links were thick and unforgiving. She'd been wearing them so long they'd worn grooves into her skin. "You're supposed to be dead," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind that whistled through the broken shutters of the way station. Emma's laugh held no humor, only bitter recognition. Dead would be easier, Caleb. Dead would be a mercy. She took another step forward, and the chain pulled taut with a metallic scrape that set his teeth on edge. But dead doesn't pay debts. Dead doesn't settle accounts. The way station had been empty when he'd ridden up 20 minutes ago, or so he'd thought. Now he understood why his horse had been so skittish, why the hair on the back of his neck had been standing on end. This place reeked of secrets and suffering, and Emma, his Emma, was chained to it like a ghost bound to her grave. "How long?" he asked, dismounting slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the colt at his hip. 3 years, 2 months, 16 days. She said it without hesitation, as if she'd been counting every sunrise, every sunset, waiting for this moment. "Since the night you left me in Denver." The words hit him like a physical blow. The night he'd left her, the night everything had gone wrong, the night he'd thought she'd died in that hotel fire, consumed by flames meant for him. But here she was, alive and chained, and the look in her eyes told him that whatever hell she'd endured, he was responsible for every link of it. Section 2, Moral Decision. Caleb holstered his gun and stepped closer, his boots crunching on the sun-baked earth. The chain around Emma's wrists wasn't just iron, it was connected to something heavy inside the way station, something that kept her tethered to this god-forsaken place like a dog on a leash. "Who did this to you?" His voice was rough with barely contained rage. Emma's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You did, Caleb. The moment you walked out of that hotel room, you did this." She rattled the chains for emphasis. "Marcus Doyle sends his regards." The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus Doyle, the man whose money Caleb had stolen, whose operation he'd burned to the ground before fleeing Denver. The man who'd sworn to make him pay for every stolen dollar, every ruined scheme. "I thought you were dead," Caleb repeated, reaching toward her shackles. She jerked back, the metal clanking against itself. "Don't," her voice was sharp. "You touch these chains and he'll know. He's got men watching, Caleb, always watching." She glanced toward the horizon where the sun was painting the sky blood red. "They'll be back soon. They always come back at nightfall." Caleb's mind raced. He could draw his gun, shoot the chains apart, throw Emma on his horse and ride hard for the border. But if Doyle's men were watching, if they were coming back, why here? Why this place? "Because this is where you'd come," Emma said simply. "Doyle knows you, Caleb, knows your patterns, your habits. He knew that eventually you'd ride through Sweetwater Pass, and when you did, you'd stop at Miller's way station for water and shelter." She gestured to the crumbling building behind her. "Been waiting here every day for 3 years, chained like an animal, all so he could have his revenge when you finally showed up." The desert wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds skittering across the yard like tiny ghosts. Caleb could hear it now, the distant sound of hoofbeats on the wind, still miles away but getting closer. His horse nickered nervously, ears pricked toward the sound. "How many?" he asked. 6, maybe 7. Emma's eyes never left his face. They'll surround this place, and they'll make you watch what they do to me before they put a bullet in your brain. Caleb's hand moved to his gun again. 6 men. He'd faced worse odds before, but never with Emma chained in the middle of the fight, never with her life hanging in the balance alongside his own. Unless Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "You do what you do best. You run. You leave me here and save yourself, just like you did in Denver." The accusation stung because it was true. He had run. He'd thought she was dead, but he'd run without looking back, without making sure, and now she was paying the price for his cowardice with every day spent in chains. Section 3. Danger arrives. The hoofbeats were closer now, no longer a whisper on the wind, but a steady drumming that seemed to make the very ground tremble. Caleb counted them in his head, at least 6 horses, riding hard, kicking up a dust cloud that rose like smoke against the darkening sky. "Get inside," he ordered, but Emma shook her head. "The chain won't reach. I'm anchored to the support beam in the main room, but the door's too narrow. I can't get more than 5 feet from this threshold." She rattled the shackles again, and Caleb saw how the metal had carved deep grooves into the adobe doorframe from 3 years of desperate pulling. He grabbed the chain, following it with his hands into the dim interior of the way station. The other end was wrapped around a massive wooden beam that supported the sagging roof, wrapped and welded shut with iron bands. It would take dynamite to break it loose, and they had minutes at most. "There's a loose board in the back wall," Emma whispered urgently, 3 planks from the corner. "I've been working at it for months. You could slip through, get to your horse. I'm not leaving you again, then we'll both die." Her voice was matter-of-fact, resigned, "and it'll be for nothing." The dust cloud was visible now, a brown smear against the purple twilight. Caleb could make out individual riders, 7 of them spread out in a line like wolves closing in on wounded prey. They rode with the casual confidence of men who knew their quarry was trapped. "Caleb Hartwell," the voice carried across the desert, amplified by the silence that fell when the wind suddenly died. "Been a long time, boy." Marcus Doyle himself. Caleb recognized the voice, smooth as whiskey, cold as winter morning. The man who'd built an empire on blood and brutality, who collected debts with interest paid in suffering. "Come on out, Caleb. Let's settle this like gentlemen." There was laughter in Doyle's voice, the kind of laughter that came before screaming. Caleb checked his ammunition, 18 bullets in his gun belt, 6 in the cylinder. Not nearly enough. His rifle was still on his horse, 50 yards away across open ground. Might as well be on the moon. "He'll make it slow," Emma whispered, her eyes fixed on the approaching riders. "For both of us. That's his way." The riders had stopped just out of rifle range, dark silhouettes against the dying light. One of them, Doyle, judging by his size and the white hat he always wore, raised something to his lips. A brass trumpet, polished to a mirror shine. The sound that emerged was not a bugle call, but something far more chilling, a funeral dirge, slow and mournful, the kind of music played over fresh graves. It echoed off the canyon walls, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "That's new," Emma muttered. "He always did have a flair for the dramatic," Caleb replied, drawing his Colt. The familiar weight of it in his hand was small comfort against 7 armed men, and the certainty of death. But as he looked at Emma, really looked at her for the first time since dismounting, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The chains weren't just around her wrists. There was a thin metal collar around her throat, barely visible beneath her hair, connected to the wrist shackles by a delicate but unbreakable chain. Section 4. Human connection. "Jesus, Emma." Caleb's voice broke as he saw the collar. "What did he do to you?" Emma's hand went instinctively to her throat, fingers tracing the thin band of metal. "He wanted to make sure I couldn't forget who owned me," she said quietly. "Every breath, every swallow, every word, all of it his." Caleb holstered his gun and moved closer, his fingers hovering over the collar without touching. This close, he could see the fine engravings etched into the metal, not decorative scrollwork but words, burned into the iron with acid. "Property of Marcus Doyle, return if found." "I'm going to kill him," Caleb whispered, and for the first time since he'd arrived, Emma smiled, really smiled, not the bitter twist of lips she'd been wearing like armor. "I know you will," she said. "That's why I waited. That's why I didn't give up, even when the days felt like years and the nights felt like forever." She reached into her dress and pulled out something small, pressing it into his palm. "I kept this. Through everything, I kept it." Caleb looked down at the object in his hand, and felt his heart stop. It was a small silver locket, tarnished black with age and wear, the locket he'd given her on their last night together in Denver, the one that held a photograph of them both, young and foolish and desperately in love. "You said you'd come back for me," Emma continued, her voice soft as desert wind. "In that hotel room, right before everything went to hell, you promised you'd come back. I thought you were dead." The words came out cracked and broken. "I saw the flames, heard the screaming. I looked for you, Emma. I swear I looked. I know." She pressed her chained hands against his cheek, the metal cold against his skin. "Doyle made sure you'd think that. Had his men spread lamp oil while we were distracted, set the fire and made it look like an accident. But he pulled me out before the smoke could take me, wanted me alive for this moment." The funeral dirge had stopped, and in the sudden silence, Caleb could hear individual voices carrying across the desert, Doyle's men calling to each other, positioning themselves, preparing for the final act of a play that had been 3 years in the making. "Whatever happens," Emma whispered, "whatever you have to do to survive this, I need you to know, I never blamed you for leaving. I blamed you for not taking me with you, but never for leaving." Caleb opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside, the photograph was still there, 2 young faces laughing at something beyond the camera's view, caught in a moment of perfect happiness that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "We were so young," he murmured. "We were so stupid," Emma corrected, but she was smiling again, thinking we could steal from Marcus Doyle and just ride off into the sunset like some dime novel. Maybe we still can. Section 5, Full Resolution plus Epilogue. Emma was about to respond when the first shot rang out, not aimed at them, but fired into the air, a signal for the final act to begin. Caleb snapped the locket shut and slipped it into his vest pocket, right over his heart. "I've got an idea," he said, moving to the support beam where Emma's chain was anchored. "But I need you to trust me." "Always have," she replied, without hesitation. Caleb pulled out his knife and began carving at the adobe wall around the beam, working at the soft clay mortar that held the stones in place. It was painstaking work, but the years had already done most of the job. The mortar was cracked and crumbling, weakened by desert heat and winter cold. "Caleb Hartwell," Doyle's voice boomed across the yard. "Time's up, boy. Come on out and face what's coming to you." "Keep him talking," Caleb whispered, his knife working frantically at the mortar. Emma stepped as far forward as her chains would allow, her voice carrying clear across the desert air. "Marcus Doyle, you want him, you yellow-bellied snake. Come and take him yourself instead of hiding behind your hired guns." There was a moment of surprised silence, then Doyle's laughter echoed off the canyon walls. Well, 3 years in chains haven't dulled that sharp tongue of yours, have they, darling? 3 years thinking about all the ways I'm going to watch you die." Emma shot back. A chunk of mortar came loose in Caleb's hands, then another. The beam was shifting now, settling slightly as its supports weakened. "Just a little more, touching reunion," Doyle called out. "But all good things must come to an end. Boys, light 'em up." The first bullet splintered the door frame inches from Emma's head. Caleb threw himself forward, shielding her with his body as more shots peppered the adobe walls, but instead of the sustained volley he expected, there was only scattered firing, and then shouting, confused and angry. Caleb risked a look around the doorframe and saw why. His horse, spooked by the gunfire, had broken free and was galloping directly toward Doyle's line, kicking up a massive dust cloud that obscured the shooter's vision. In the confusion, 2 of Doyle's men had their horses rear and bolt, leaving gaps in the line. "Now or never," Caleb grunted, throwing his full weight against the loosened beam. It groaned, shifted, and with a sound like thunder, gave way. The entire section of roof came down in a crash of adobe and timber, but the chain came free. Emma stumbled as the sudden slack nearly sent her sprawling, but Caleb caught her, the weight of her chains pulling them both toward the ground. Together they staggered toward the back of the way station, where Emma's months of patient work had loosened 3 boards just enough for them to squeeze through. Behind them Doyle's voice rose above the chaos. "Burn it, burn the whole damn place." They burst through the back wall as the first flames began licking at the front of the building. Caleb's horse, having completed its panicked circuit of the yard, stood trembling near a cluster of rocks 50 yards away, too far to reach before Doyle's men regrouped. But Emma was already moving, the chains around her wrists swinging like weapons as she grabbed a fallen piece of timber from the collapsed roof. "This way," she gasped, leading him not toward the horse, but toward a narrow canyon cut that he hadn't noticed before. They ran as the way station burned behind them, Emma's intimate knowledge of the terrain guiding them through passages too narrow for horses, over rocks too treacherous for pursuit. The chains that had been her prison for 3 years now became their salvation, the weight of them helping her maintain balance on the precarious path. It wasn't until they'd climbed high enough to look back that Caleb saw the full scope of what had happened. The way station was a pillar of flame against the night sky, and around it, Doyle's men rode in frustrated circles, their quarry vanished like smoke. "There's a town," Emma panted, pointing toward lights in the distance, 20 miles through the canyon. "Telegraph office." Caleb nodded, understanding. Telegraph meant law, meant help, meant an end to running. Years later, after the chains had been cut away and the scars had faded to thin white lines, after Marcus Doyle had been tried and hanged for a dozen crimes in 3 different territories, Emma would remember this moment, not the fear or the pain or the desperate flight through darkness, but the weight of Caleb's hand in hers, and the promise in his voice when he said, "This time we ride together." The last thing anyone in Sweetwater Pass saw that night was 2 figures silhouetted against the stars, walking into the canyon with their chains finally broken, and their shadows falling behind them like shed skin.